Shabbat Shalom. It's a pleasure to be here to speak with you. This year, 2022, we celebrate the 50th anniversary of the ordination of Rabbi Sally Priesand, the first woman to be ordained by a rabbinical seminary. She made history on June 3rd, 1972 in Cincinnati and carved out a path for many women to follow, first in the Reform movement, but then eventually in Reconstructionist, conservative, and even to some extent in modern Orthodox movements. So how did I end up having the privilege of calling Rabbi Priesand my colleague? In June of 1972, I was unaware of the momentous achievement of Rabbi Priesand and the Reform movement. I was actually fairly unaware of anything Jewish. I grew up in a secular assimilated family in New York, didn't belong to any Jewish organization, and had no formal Jewish education. Rabbi Priesand, on the other hand, grew up in a Jewishly active family, belonged to a Reform congregation in Cleveland, and was educated through confirmation. When she was 16, she decided she wanted to be a rabbi. At 16, I was a freshman in college with a schedule heavy in math and science. In June of 1972, when Rabbi Priesand was celebrating her ordination, I was preparing to move with my husband and two toddlers into Bucks County, Pennsylvania, looking for a part-time job in biology or chemistry and spending some free time playing folk music on my guitar. Fast forward a few years. We settled into Newtown. Harvey worked at building his medical practice, and I decided to stay at home with the boys who were starting school. I continued to connect with the folk music community and eventually became president of the Bucks County Folk Song Society. When we found out that there was a Reform congregation just getting started, we became one of the first families to help build Bucks County Jewish congregation, now known as Shirami. And that's when the trouble started. Two women, Marcia Abraham, Zichrona Livracha, and Linda Brown, knowing about my folk music connections, came to me with an idea. They wanted to start a small folksy choir for services. Would I lead it? Panic set in immediately, and I blurted out, I think you have the wrong person. I can't read Hebrew. I don't know any Jewish music other than Dayenu, and I know nothing about the service. Two words changed my life. They said, don't worry. Everything would be in transliteration, the music would be simple, and they would help me. Don't worry, they said, but I did. It wasn't about being in front of people or singing in a different language. I had done performances before and sung in German, French, and Swahili. The worry was about being responsible for other people's prayer, maybe making a fool of myself, and just not knowing enough about being Jewish. So I worried, but I said okay anyway. Linda and Marcy did help me, and I enjoyed singing with the congregation, but I still worried. So I enrolled in courses at Gratz College in Philadelphia to learn Hebrew, history, and Jewish tradition. I figured that being the one up in front with the guitar, people would assume I knew something. So I had to learn. Learning about Judaism as an adult transformed me. A fire was lit inside of me. I wanted to share what I was learning, especially with other adults, especially women who came from backgrounds like mine. After Rabbi Strom came to Shira me, I continued to learn in every class he gave, as well as at Gratz. I was one of the 2 women in the very first adult bat mitzvah class here at Shira me. After a while, I began to teach adult education, basic Hebrew reading, holidays, and life cycle. I became a mitzvah tutor and loved all of it. But I don't remember ever thinking, I want to be a rabbi. Actually, women rabbis were still pretty rare. I did know that the more I learned, the more I wanted to learn. The more I taught, the more I wanted to teach. And the more I was involved in Jewish living, the more I wanted a Jewish life. It was people here in the congregation who asked, "Are you going to be a rabbi?" My initial answer must have sounded like Moses when God told him to go to Pharaoh. Moses said, "Who, me?" And so did I. Me? A rabbi? But that nudge kept coming from friends and congregants, so I started to wonder, what do others see in me? What am I missing? After some twists and turns and a few stops and starts, I decided that I could follow this path. So in the fall of 1987, with Rabbi Strom's support, I applied to Hebrew Union College. Of course, there were some friends who were more skeptical. They said, "The program is 5 years and you're already 41 years old. By the time you finish, you'd be 46. True. But then I realized that in 5 years, I would be 46 years old anyway. I could be 46 and a rabbi, or be 46 and always wonder, what if? I discovered at my interview in 1988 that although about 100 women had by that time been ordained, not everything would be smooth sailing. Actually, it wasn't so much a gender issue, although I did find out later that the interviews for some women were harsher and more antagonistic than for men. For me, it was the age issue. Surprisingly, in a tradition that honors age and the wisdom that comes with experience, I was questioned several times about my ability to learn. That might sound funny now, but it wasn't back then. I was grilled about my ability to keep up with the younger students, especially learning Hebrew. I emphatically said, yes, I could. I had already mastered basic Hebrew, but there were still many doubters. Much later, I found out that the older male students, who were also second career applicants, didn't get questioned so much about their age. So maybe it was a bit of ageism and sexism. Rabbi Presand had more serious challenges. Many did not want her in the rabbinic program at all. Others warned her that her chances of employment were very limited, and still others accused her of only wanting to be in the program to find a rabbi to marry. I can't imagine how frustrating it was for her. But she was confident and persistent, and she had a strong ally in Dr. Nelson Gluck, then president of HUC. His successor, Dr. Alfred Gottschalk, had the privilege of ordaining Rabbi Presand 50 years ago. And he ordained me in 1993. He said about Rabbi Presand that it was a historic moment and a testament to Reform Judaism's efforts at achieving equality for women. The movement has come a long way, but there is still much more to be done in areas of gender and orientation equality with regard to admission, the in-school experience, employment opportunities, and compensation. We're not there yet. But despite the ageism and sexism, which was much more prevalent and serious than many knew about, I thrived in rabbinic school. Some people call it finding your bliss. I made lifelong friends, learned about Judaism and about myself more than I could have ever imagined. And while in Israel, I attended the very first march of the Women of the Wall on their way to the Kotel with a Torah scroll in hand. That woke me up to how serious the backlash against women participating fully in Jewish life was. It devolved into a melee of shouts and fights, mostly from the men on the other side of the mechitza. Still, I'm glad I was there. Later at HUC in New York, I met Rabbi Shira Joseph, who was ordained a few years after me. She also became a lifelong friend when, as coincidence would have it, she was hired at Shirami as an assistant rabbi. After my ordination, I served a small congregation in New Jersey before leaving the pulpit for graduate study. Rabbi Presand had more serious employment challenges after ordination. She said that some congregations only interviewed her for public value so they could say they were first. Others wouldn't even speak to her, and she was the last of her class to get a job. It took her 9 years of obstacles until 1981, when she became the solo rabbi of Monmouth Reform Temple in New Jersey. She retired in 2006 and remains active in the Reform movement. I was focused on an academic life, so I was able to do part-time work again at Shirami. I worked behind the scenes to support the other clergy while I was in graduate school. That's where my unique title, rabbinic scholar, came from. It took another 20 years of graduate study in several different institutions to finally get my Doctor of Ministry, which I did in 2013. While I have the credentials to be called doctor, I think one Dr. Goldberg in the family is enough. Besides, I much prefer being called rabbi. While my official retirement came in June 2020, it doesn't mean I'm actually retired. I continue to support the other clergy, lead the Saturday morning minyan, and encourage others to learn and live a Jewish life. My bliss. So that's it, the short version of my unlikely story. I still love biology, chemistry, and all science, and try to help others see that science and religion are not enemies, but rather partners. I still love singing, not so much folk music now, but still with the Shirami choir that I helped to found. And I am ever grateful to this community that lit the spark, nurtured and encouraged me, and supported me along my journey, and still does. Thank you. Shabbat Shalom.